person, or I can create this artificial construct where as the person pushes, I actually grab their wrist and I pull them into me as hard as I can.
Rob, maybe you can talk a little bit about like doing agete as a pull instead of trying to push, and what might be meant by that.
So Vivek used, he specifically said, I push, which to me, I'm like, then we're doing two completely separate things. And by the way, I understand that model per se, like, and Vivek, isn't going to have as much conditioning as somebody else, et cetera, but the same basic premise is there, where you're moving forces, somebody is applying pressure to you, and then you're trying to create that ground path, right? Direct back up to the person, move them up and away from you. The thing with Agete is that, when you watch any of the Daitoryu guys that are like really good, or Sagawa, like, he didn't allow video, the people are going up. And that means that they're not using a push that goes out, like their elbows don't extend this way. In fact, I'd argue that something got distorted so in Aikido, they do the kokyu dosa out and away like this. And like, that's not how the parent art Daitoryu practiced it at all. Like, it was about bringing the person straight up for kuzushi purposes, because then you would throw the guy afterwards. But as far as like the difference between that push and pull, what you can do is, if you have a partner, you just, I think I've talked about this before on my Facebook thing, but like, if you take a stick here, and if I have this imaginary stick, and let's say somebody's holding that stick. Now, I could try and move that person by, I approach them, my hands are on the stick, and then I could create that Jin force. So they're pushing onto me, and I reply with that Jin force, and then I move my hands away like this. So I'm creating that upwards Jin force, or upwards force, directly into that person and move them away. Or what I can do is I can rest my hands on the stick. And let me see, I don't have a stick on hand, but if this were the stick, then I would rest the stick maybe about here. And then instead, I bring my palm underneath. When I do that, when I bring the palm underneath, what happens is then the force comes down across my front. And when that happens, and I can move the person away, then the other person is like, oh, that's different. That's different than creating a force that you reply upwards, up into the person essentially, and you move them up and away, versus you bend your wrist underneath so that that incoming force is then taken down the front. And to the other person, what generally happens, they're like, oh, that's weird. The pressure, it's like dissipates. It feels like it goes away. So there's a couple ways to look at this, but the most interesting thing is that when I'm doing this, I'm no longer pushing. In fact, when I do this, it's like somebody's doing the rumba underneath, with my limb. And when that happens, I'm creating a pull. I'm creating a pull underneath here. And to be clear, this is an artificial construct, just so that you can feel that pull down the front. That's not actually how you manipulate the front, et cetera, et cetera. You don't necessarily have, well, you can manipulate it from the fingers if you want, or you can do it directly from here. But the point being is that you're pulling your hand away from your body. And then when that happens, I think Alex was the one that came up with the kind of a really good demo where it's like, okay, so if somebody puts their hand onto me like this and they push really hard, I could relaxedly take that force into, to steal Sigmund's words, take that force down into my feet so that my feet are handling forces, and then I use that normal force and direct that back up into the person. Or I can create this artificial construct where as the person pushes, I actually grab their wrist and I pull them into me as hard as I can. And when you pull them into your body as hard as you can, then something weird happens. It feels like the person is just perpetually pushing into like this, they're dumping all their force into this like black hole. They're pushing, but that force is just negated. It's like I'm pushing, but it's all getting dumped into this weird hole. It's like it's having no effect. It feels like I'm exerting all my force, but I feel like I'm exerting no force.
Yeah, what I kind of said the other day, that it's, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same feeling, but it's maybe something that anyone can relate to because they probably had this experience at some point. Like if you're pushing on someone and they're resisting, and by the way, this is like judo, like 101 first aid type thing. They're pushing on you, and then you pull them at the same time.
Yeah.
That kind of push, that feeling disappears, right? Because you're pushing the direction that they're being pushed on. Now they're being pulled along, so that pressure kind of disappears. And one of the things I might say, kind of, this gets maybe a little back to the brain hack idea that Ark has talked about, is that when that disappears and you have nothing that's you're resisting, I think many other people have had the same reaction, like when you're tripping and you lose your balance, you kind of like jerk and grab something. So I think in one respect, this might be what kind of happens in Agete when you have that vacuum and you're being raised, is that now your body like instinctually is trying to grab onto it and exert some sort of force, and you're propelling yourself even further, which may account to some degree why you see kind of an explosive movement. While you can do Agete with an explosive movement, there's lots of variations to do that. That's not what is being relied upon to cause someone to shoot upwards.
Yeah.
Alex, if he was here, I know he'd say it again. He hates this exercise. You'll see him, someone's grabbing, and he just pops his wrist like that, and that's enough to lock up, the shoulders and do the movement. So,
and he hates Agete.
yeah.
That's because he's lazy.